Lord Jesus Christ, you are listening to the Voice of Reason. And today, I'm finally going to talk about it. Today, I am finally going to address the huge controversy. Today, I'm finally going to acknowledge what everyone has been talking about nonstop for almost a month now. See, for the last month, every time I open up YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or Patreon, every phone call I get, every text message I get, every letter I receive in the mail, everything, no matter what it is, no matter what the medium is, everyone keeps asking me about what Pope Francis said in Singapore last month. Nonstop, every single day. Everyone wants to know what the Voice of Reason thinks about the words of Pope Francis. And not only that, a lot of people I've noticed too, well, I've been told, and I've seen a little bit here and there, there's some people that are saying online, they're saying, Voice of Reason, he's been pretty quiet since Pope Francis said what he said. Why hasn't Voice of Reason talked about this? Could it be that Voice of Reason now knows that what the Pope said is just false, it's just wrong, it's just heretical, and that Catholicism has been disproven because the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, has just said something that is heretical, and Voice of Reason can't face the facts? Voice of Reason is afraid to talk about or even acknowledge what Pope Francis said. That's what apparently people are saying. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm seeing here and there. People are really worked up about what Pope Francis said in Singapore last month, because what everyone is saying is that Pope Francis is a heretic. What everyone is saying is that Pope Francis has contradicted the gospel. Everyone is accusing Pope Francis of being a religious pluralist or being indifferent to religion. Why? Because in the middle of last month, in the middle of September, Pope Francis took a trip to Singapore and he gave a speech. And in that speech, he said, all religions are paths to God.
Tutte le religioni sono un cammino per arrivare a Dio.
Because every religion is a way to arrive at God.
Dirò una comparazione, sono come diverse lingue, diversi idiomi per arrivare lì.
Sort of a comparison, an example would be they're sort of like different languages in order to arrive at God.
Ma Dio è Dio per tutti.
But God is God for all.
E come Dio è Dio per tutti, noi siamo tutti figli di Dio.
And if God is God for all, then we're all sons and daughters of God.
Ma il mio Dio è più importante del tuo.
But my God is more important than your God.
È vero quello?
Is that true?
C'è un solo Dio lì. E noi sono idiomi, cammino, lingue per arrivare a Dio.
There's only one God, and each of us is a language, so to speak, in order to arrive at God.
Qualcuno è Sikh, qualcuno musulmano, qualcuno
Sikh, Muslim,
Hindi, qualcuno cristiano,
Indo,
ma sono
Christian.
diversi cammini.
There are different paths.
And because of that one thing that he said, saying that all religions are paths to God, he said that all religions are like different languages that we use to try and get to God. Because of that, everyone is accusing Pope Francis of being a religious pluralist, a religious indifferentist. Everyone is accusing Pope Francis of heresy, of contradicting the gospel of Jesus Christ. But here's the thing, here's the problem with that. And let me just say, the reason that I have taken so long to discuss this is there's two reasons. First of all, I've just been really busy. Me and my producer, the last month, we've been traveling everywhere. We've been going places. We've been talking to people. We've been shaking hands, kissing babies. We've been doing a lot. We've been very busy. We have a lot going on right now. So I just honestly haven't had the time to talk about this. That's one reason. But there's actually a second reason. And that is that I intentionally wait. I take my time and I wait. Because I know in my life, what I've learned is that only fools rush in. And I know especially when it comes to church politics and when it comes to Pope Francis, I've learned that whenever Pope Francis says something that is crazy or that's something that's really controversial, I've learned that you need to wait just a little bit. You need to wait before you comment on it. You need to wait before you jump on it. You need to wait before you run with any narrative, because almost every single time almost every single time when Pope Francis says or does something controversial and everyone online runs with a particular narrative, there will be something else that happens, another piece of information or something else that is said or done that completely disproves the narrative that everyone is running with at the time. It's happened a lot. It happens a lot with Pope Francis, and guess what? This time is no different. The exact same thing happened this time. And everybody that jumped on this Pope Francis story, everyone that ran with that narrative, today, at the time of that I'm recording this, everyone looks really, really, really dumb. Which is usually the case when it comes to the critics of Pope Francis. Why does everyone look dumb now? Well, these people only look dumb to the people that are on the inside that know, because the unfortunate fact of the matter is that most people aren't aware of the full story. How many of you know, how many of you were aware that 2 weeks after Pope Francis said what he said in Singapore, how many of you know that Pope Francis took a trip to Belgium and to Luxembourg, and that on each of those stops, on both of those stops, Pope Francis said this. Pope Francis said on 2 separate occasions, 2 weekends after his Singapore trip, Pope Francis said that the gospel of Jesus Christ alone is what can transform the human soul, and that it is the only thing that can reconcile mankind to God. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew that Pope Francis said that 2 weekends ago at the time that I'm recording this? 2 weeks after a Singapore trip, Pope Francis said that salvation is found in the gospel of Jesus Christ alone. Did you all know that? All of you content creators that made all of these videos about Pope Francis, calling him a heretic, saying that Catholicism is false, that the papacy is false, all of you anti-Catholics, did you know that Pope Francis said that literally just 2 weeks later? I don't think any of you knew because I haven't seen anybody talk about it. The only person that I've seen talk about this is none other than the wonderful Michael Lofton from Reason and Theology. Because Michael Lofton leaves no stone unturned. Michael Lofton is the best. He has all the information. And he reports things that no one else wants to report. He reports things that everyone else misses. Like all of these content creators, I haven't seen a single one of them talk about what Pope Francis said 2 weekends ago. Everyone is talking about what he said in the middle of September, but no one is talking about what he said at the end of September. And by the way, if you guys want to see for yourselves what Pope Francis actually said in these trips to Luxembourg and to Belgium, we'll put links down below so that you guys can read for yourselves. Pope Francis affirming that salvation is found in the gospel of Jesus Christ alone. And here's the thing. Even if Pope Francis hadn't said what he said 2 weekends ago in Luxembourg and in Belgium, we have 11 years of Pope Francis's pontificate where he has said over and over and over and over again that salvation is found in Jesus Christ alone. He has said that numerous times. He constantly says that as the Pope in his pontificate, in his magisterium. So why is everybody ignoring 11 years of Pope Francis's pontificate, but focusing in on this one thing that he said last month in Singapore, and they're coming to a lot of crazy and wild conclusions out of what Pope Francis said? So here are the 2 mistakes that everyone is making. Well, 3 mistakes actually. Really, the first mistake is jumping on a Pope Francis story right away, right off the bat, without waiting until you get all of the information, because again, every time something like this happens with Pope Francis, something else will come out not too long after the fact that will dispel all of these really dumb narratives that everyone loves to promote. That's the first mistake. The second mistake is that everyone that I've seen online, they're saying that Pope Francis teaches, that Pope Francis is teaching a heresy. And the third mistake is that everyone is saying that Pope Francis personally believes that all religions are salvific. Well, neither of these things are true. All of the people who are saying that Pope Francis taught religious pluralism, that's false. He didn't. Everyone who is saying that Pope Francis personally believes that all religions are paths to God, that's false, because he has said over the course of 11 years, over and over and over again, most recently 2 weekends ago, that salvation is found in the gospel of Jesus Christ alone. So everyone that's been critiquing the Pope over this, they're just wrong on all counts. And see, I actually I like the fact that we have a Pope that's a little controversial sometimes, because it's a really good opportunity to show people how the papacy actually works. Because a lot of people are still under the impression that whatever the Pope says, no matter what he says, when he says it, how he says it, where he is when he says it, if he says it, that it's binding, and that's not the case. So I like the fact that we have a Pope that sometimes says crazy things, because now it gives us Catholics who know better, it gives us an opportunity, a chance to educate those who don't know better about how the Catholic Church actually works. Everyone that is saying that Pope Francis taught a heresy, you're false, you're wrong, you're incorrect. Pope Francis didn't teach anything. What Pope Francis said in Singapore was not an official papal teaching. What Pope Francis said in Singapore is not part of his magisterium. How does the Pope teach? In his magisterium. How does the Catholic Church as a whole teach? In its magisterium. What Pope Francis said in Singapore is not magisterial. But when you actually look at everything that Pope Francis has said that is magisterial, guess what you're going to find? It is 100% orthodox. 100% of the time, everything that he has said in his magisterium. Why? Because, it turns out, the Pope is incapable of teaching heresy to the universal church. And guess what, my friends? Pope Francis has never taught heresy in his magisterium. His magisterium is what counts. His magisterium is what is actually binding. A lot of people are going back to the clip from my debate with James White, where I said that if the Catholic Church were to do this, that it would invalidate Catholicism. If the Pope or the universal magisterium of the Church ever came out and said that gay marriage was moral, then Catholicism is false. So it's very easy to falsify it. That's all the Pope would ever have to do is say, we allow gay marriage now, we'll have gay marriages, gay weddings at our churches. And if the Catholic Church ever did that, Catholicism is false. So look out for that. For anybody here that wants to prove Catholicism false, that's all you have to look out for. But it hasn't happened in 2,000 years, and it will never happen. Because I believe in trends, and if you go 2,000 years without messing that up, it's probably not going to happen. So yeah, that would be a way to falsify the Catholic Church. But we don't have to worry about that because that would not happen. Because it hasn't happened. And I said that in the context of the Catholic Church allowing same-sex weddings or allowing same-sex marriage. And everyone flocked to that clip and they said, oh, look, voice of reason. You said that if the Catholic Church did this, that Catholicism is false. Well, guess what? Pope Francis just failed, so Catholicism is false. Then again, it just shows that people still don't know or aren't aware of how the magisterium works. Go back to what I said in the debate with James White. I'm clear. I said it over and over again. I said, find me one magisterial teaching from Pope Francis that either overturns, abandons, or contradicts any magisterial teaching of the Catholic Church in the last 2,000 years. I challenged Dr. White to provide one, and he wasn't able to because it doesn't exist. The Pope's magisterium is what is important here. And the magisterium of all popes, including Pope Francis, is 100% orthodox. So the Catholic claims have not been harmed at all by what Pope Francis said. Not at all. So what do we make of what Pope Francis actually said in Singapore, especially when you take that into context of everything else that Pope Francis has said since he became the Pope in 2013? Especially in light of what he literally just said on 2 separate occasions 2 weekends ago in Europe. How do we reconcile what Pope Francis said in Singapore with what Pope Francis said in Europe and with what he's been saying for 11 years now? See, this is what I mean when I say that people are very sloppy. People are not careful when it comes to analyzing the Pope Francis, because they will isolate one thing that he says and they'll ignore everything else that he says. There are people online that really, truly, honestly, and sincerely believe that Pope Francis believes that any and all religions are salvific. that one can find salvation in any religion. Pick one, it doesn't matter. But Pope Francis didn't say that. That's not what he said. What did Pope Francis say when he was in Singapore? Well, it turns out that Pope Francis was invited to an interreligious event. It was a gathering of people from all different religions in Singapore because, for those of you who maybe aren't aware, Singapore is one of the most religiously diverse places in the entire world. And Pope Francis was invited to speak at this function, which was a gathering of people from all these different religions. And Pope Francis was at this event, and he was there to speak, and he was actually going to deliver a pre-written speech. But at the very last minute, he decided to not read his speech, and he decided to just go off the cuff. And if there's one thing that we can say about Pope Francis, which is a valid criticism, is that whenever Pope Francis, is just flowing off the top of his head, whenever he's improvising, whenever he's speaking off the cuff, he really tends to misspeak, or he tends to be unclear, or he tends to say things that can easily be misunderstood. So if we want to critique the Pope, one valid critique that we can say is, you know what? I don't think Pope Francis should be speaking off the cuff. I think that Pope Francis should only give speeches that are pre-written, that he's pre-written himself, and that he should never go off script, because when he does that, it can cause a lot of confusion. And that's something that Pope Francis is guilty of, and he is guilty of it again here in Singapore. But when you go and you look at what Pope Francis actually said, and you look at the context of what he said, which most people don't even know, most people who are commenting on this, they don't know where Pope Francis was, what he was doing, what the event was, who he was addressing, what he had just said before, what he said directly after. At this event, Pope Francis was addressing a bunch of kids, a bunch of youth, and he told them he was going to read his pre-written speech, but he got really excited at what he was seeing there at all of these young people, that he wanted to make sure that he really connected with them. So he decided to just, again, improvise and go off the cuff, which, again, isn't always a good idea because Pope Francis has shown that he's not very good at it. But he said that he admired all of those children that he was addressing, all of the young people. He said that he admired them because of their ability to have interreligious dialogue. People of different religions having dialogue to discuss the truths of God. And he was saying that it was good that they were able to do it in a way that was peaceful and in a way that was intelligent, because what he said was that usually when these interreligious dialogues happen, they devolve into someone saying, my God is better than your God, and then fighting happening. And what Pope Francis actually said here in this interreligious gathering, full of people from all different religions, he said there's only one God. Only one God. Which is obviously true. That is certainly in line with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Pope Francis said there is only one God. So far, so good. But then, after he said that, is when he said that there are different religions and that all religions are paths to God. And then he even goes on to say that all of these different religions are like languages, different languages to try and get to the one God. And this was what people were focusing on, and this is what people were saying, that here's the heresy. Here is the heresy of Pope Francis. And from what he said here, everyone is coming to the conclusions that, again, he's a religious pluralist, that he's a religious indifferentist. But when you read what he said, I don't think you can come to that conclusion. I think that when you read what he actually said, when you watch what he actually said, because it's on video, it actually just creates questions. Because if I had been there, I would have asked him, I would have said, well, Pope Francis, when you say this, what do you mean by it? Do you mean that one can achieve salvation in any and all religions, meaning that any and all religions by their own virtue are able to get you to heaven? That there is salvation in all religions, that it doesn't matter what religion you are as long as you're an adherent to that religion and you're faithful to that religion, no matter which one it is? Does that mean that you can be saved and go to heaven and be with God for all of eternity? That's what I would have asked Pope Francis if I had been there, because what he said just wasn't clear. But guess what? I don't have to wonder or guess what Pope Francis would have said had I been there to ask him that question, had any of us been there to ask him that question. We know what his response would have been in light of what he said, again, 2 weeks later, and in light of what he has said during his entire pontificate. Pope Francis has said over and over and over again, not only when he's speaking as just a private person, which is what he was doing here in Singapore, then as a matter of fact, 2 weekends ago when he was in Belgium and when he was in Luxembourg, those statements weren't magisterial either. He wasn't teaching either. But in his magisterium, he has always said that salvation is found in Jesus Christ alone. Salvation is found in Christ's church alone. Salvation is found in the gospel alone. That's what he has said, what he has always said in his magisterium. And then even when he's not speaking magisterially, he says the same thing. And then sometimes, every once in a while, he'll say something that can be misunderstood to be the opposite of the correct message, which is that the gospel is found in Jesus Christ alone. But when I saw that Pope Francis said what he said, I understood what he meant because I know Pope Francis, and most Catholics who are in the know, most Catholics who actually know Pope Francis, who are familiar with the writings of Pope Francis, with what he says in his magisterium and even outside of his magisterium, we all knew what he meant. Just this past weekend, I had the opportunity to hang out with Uncatechized Catholic. Desiree, shout out to you. We got to hang out and we had a really good discussion about this. And Desiree said the same thing. She said, I knew what he meant when he said that because Desiree knows Pope Francis. I knew what he meant when he said that because I know Pope Francis. I know how he communicates and I know what he believes. But all of these people who are not Catholic, who have probably never read any of Pope Francis's magisterial works, who don't really know the thought of Pope Francis, they saw what the mainstream media was reporting, they saw the headlines, they saw the quote out of context, isolated from everything else that he said, and they just ran with that narrative. And they all look really dumb for doing it. Even if Pope Francis hadn't said what he said 2 weekends ago about affirming the gospel, even if he hadn't said that, they would still look dumb because they're running with something, ignoring everything else he said in the past 11 years. So is Pope Francis a heretic? I'm sorry, but there isn't enough evidence to be able to come to the conclusion that Pope Francis is a heretic or that he believes in something erroneous. Now, what he said in Singapore, was that very, very poorly worded? Absolutely. Should he have clarified? Absolutely. Should he have come out and explicitly said, hey, what I said in Singapore, that's not what I meant. For all of you who are saying that I'm teaching religious pluralism, first of all, no, I wasn't even teaching. That wasn't a teaching, and that's not even what I meant. He should have just come out directly and said that. But even though he hasn't, we still know that he didn't mean what all of you people, all of you content creators are saying that he meant. So again, I think that we need to be very, very careful. Not just when it comes to Pope Francis, not just when it comes to the Catholic Church, not just when it comes to Christianity as a whole, any church, any pastor, any church leader, anybody of any religion, we need to be really, really careful that we aren't misrepresenting people. We don't want to misrepresent people because at the end of the day, when we misrepresent people, we just look really, really stupid. And everyone that has misrepresented Pope Francis looks really, really stupid. What we can say is that Pope Francis was imprudent in saying what he said, and not sticking to the script, and not clarifying, and not being careful with his words. You can say all of that, but calling him a heretic, saying that he's disproven Catholicism for saying something that wasn't even magisterial, it just shows your ignorance if that's your position. So everyone is making a really big deal about what Pope Francis said, which can be criticized, and I think he should be criticized for being sloppy, but I think that's as far as you can go, is just say, you know what, Pope Francis is sloppy. But you know what? Let's say, just for the sake of argument, for all of you, because I know that a lot of you anti-Catholics are just, you won't be able to let it go. I know that a lot of you anti-Catholics are still, even after seeing this video, you're still going to maintain that Pope Francis is a heretic, that Pope Francis believes all of these things that contradict the gospel of Jesus Christ. I know that a lot of you are still going to maintain that position. Okay. Those of you who believe that, what you don't realize is that you are unknowingly proving the Catholic position. Everyone who is saying that Pope Francis is a personal heretic, that really, truly, and honestly believes that, you are unknowingly proving papal infallibility. This situation actually proves papal infallibility. Why? Because let's say that we grant, for the sake of argument, let's say that we say, yeah, sure, Pope Francis personally is a heretic. Pope Francis personally really believes all of these erroneous doctrines. He doesn't really believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Let's say that we grant that, just for the sake of argument, right? Well, now the question is, for all of the anti-Catholics, the question is, how come this heretical pope, this evil Pope Francis who doesn't really follow Jesus Christ, how come this mean, nasty, evil, heretical pope why hasn't he been able to teach heresy in his magisterium? Why is it that whenever Pope Francis actually is teaching as the Pope to the Universal Church, why is it that he has never been able to say any of these nasty, erroneous things that everyone keeps accusing him of believing? Why hasn't he been able to do that in his magisterium? Why? Why is it that every time that you read a magisterial teaching from Pope Francis, any magisterial document, he says that salvation is found in Jesus Christ alone? When Pope Francis became the Pope in 2013, the very first thing he did as Pope in his magisterium, his very first magisterial document was about evangelization. It was about the importance of sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ with the entire world. Evangelization is actually the #1 priority for Pope Francis. That's what he's actually said, that evangelization is his #1 priority. So, a Pope whose #1 priority is to evangelize and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ, does that sound like someone who's indifferent to religion? Does that sound like someone who's a religious pluralist? When you read what Pope Francis said a couple of weekends ago in Europe, does that sound like something that a religious pluralist would say? No, not at all. So, all of you anti-Catholics, I'm sorry, I love you, but you look really, really stupid right now. You look really dumb. And all of you Catholics that have been scandalized by what Pope Francis said, don't worry. He wasn't teaching. It wasn't part of his teaching, part of his magisterium. And again, what he even said isn't necessarily incorrect. If you properly understand it, you'll know that it's fine. Especially in light of what he said 2 weeks later. And in light of what he's been saying for 11 years now. So, let's all do better. Let's all do our homework. Let's all not rush into things to hop on narratives or to try and just be the first to break news. Let's wait and make sure we have all of the facts. Let's do our due diligence so that we don't look foolish. And again, what I said in the debate with James White, it still stands. Show me a magisterial document from Pope Francis that contradicts, abandons, or overturns a single definitive teaching of the magisterium of the last 2,000 years. Many people have tried to do it. There's even some Catholics that have tried to do it, and they've all failed. It doesn't work. But the challenge is still out there, because until then, guess what? The Catholic Church has never, ever taught a single error in 2,000 years. Never has, and it never will. No pope has ever done so, and Pope Francis is definitely not going to be the first pope to start teaching error. Why? Because the Holy Spirit runs the show. The Holy Spirit protects the Pope from teaching error to the Universal Church. And those of you who want to say Pope Francis is really personally, privately a heretic, you're proving what Vatican I said about papal infallibility. Because how could one man who is a heretic, according to you guys, how could this heretic teach the truth when he's acting as the Pope? How can a heretic uphold the gospel of Jesus Christ in his official capacity as the Pope if personally, privately, deep down, he's really this huge heretic? The only thing that can explain that is exactly what Vatican I said about papal infallibility. So remember, my friends, Jesus Christ is God, and the Catholic Church is the church that he founded. Glory to Jesus Christ.